Thank you, Stephen. Hi, friends. My name is Dave Fallscraft. I'm an alcoholic.
Love the bow tie.
I got the list of things that Stephen says I had to do to be able to speak at this meeting. Of course, that's one of them. Stephen and I think, met in Prince Edward Island a number of years ago, maybe 1990. And that was a very memorable lawyers conference up there to an outfit called International Lawyers and Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was memorable because the Saturday night speaker was a man from the area in Prince Edward Island who had spoke some English and some French and some of his First Nation dialect. And he went on and on and on. And I'm going to say maybe an hour and 20 minutes. I'm starting to look around the room and everyone's just sitting there peacefully. Nobody's saying, shut up, guy you can't understand. Nobody's saying anything. And about an hour and 20 minutes later, he gets through and everybody gives him play. And afterwards, I said to this old timer, what happened there? What was that going on? Did you understand anything he said? And the old timer said to me, Dave, there's only one story in AA, right? You know what his story was. You didn't have to understand all those words. I thought, yeah, you're right. So tonight I'm going to give you the one story in AA, right? It's a story of failure, and it's a story of grace, and it's a story of enjoying Alcoholics Anonymous today. And what my life used to be like is not terribly exciting, and what happened to get me here pretty much was that the van from the rehab brought me back, and so they're pretty pedestrian stories, but my story of what my life is like today is like fantastic. I am a satisfied customer of what you guys are giving away on a daily basis. I have no complaints about what AA has to offer. Because of what you have to offer and because of the willingness I've been given to follow that path that you folks have shown me, I can tell you tonight that I've had a spiritual experience. Now, I don't have to make up what that means. It tells me in our appendix to our big book what the spiritual experience is. And it's a profound change in the way we react to life. And I have had that. Not a perfect change, not by any measure, but a profound change in the way I react to life. I have a new menu of reactions that I did not have when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what my life is like today first, because if I don't do that, I'm liable not to get to it. I'm a member of the Saturday morning How It Works men's meeting, 7 a.m. Sometimes we get as many as 150 men showing up at that meeting. I have a sponsor who has a sponsor. I sponsor some guys. As a result of that, I go through the steps at least once a year, sometimes more. I am married to a woman who has never seen me take a drink. Last Thursday, we celebrated our 37th wedding anniversary. And it just so happened on that day that a group of lawyers here in Buffalo, sober lawyers, were having a little outside picnic. And I mentioned it to her the week before that, gee, the lawyers are having that picnic. She said, I said, but it's on our anniversary. She said, Dave, go have a hamburger with your buddies. Go ahead, that's all right. We'll have a dinner some other time. I thought, you know, how lucky am I, right? This is a woman who sees the higher power everywhere in our life. She's not in AA, but she loves AA. She's never, in 37 years, and we lived together before that, said to me, Dave, can we go out to dinner? You mind? You don't have to go to that meeting tonight, do you? Or do you have to pick up the phone when that guy calls you? Because he's going to. She has never said that to me. She is my biggest AA supporter. So we both brought into the marriage children. I brought in 3, she brought in 2. So I have experience being a stepfather and the challenges of being a stepfather. And I have experience of having kids live with their mother and not with me, and the challenges of being an absentee father. I have had a number of health concerns over the years. I've had a number of cancer operations. I'm pleased to say this evening that I'm cancer free. I have no reason why I will ever have to do that again, but I can tell you the big book is correct. You get a lot more sympathy with cancer than you do with alcoholism. There's no question about that. Two fatal illnesses. But boy, cancer does not affect families like alcoholism does. I can promise you that. I have 8 grandchildren, ranging from age of 5 to 23. And the 5-year-old is a very special little girl to my heart. Her name is Samantha. And I love her like a rainbow. Last year, my wife and I were going out, and I rarely wear a suit and tie, but I got dressed up, and she was over at the house, and I walked by her, and she looked at me, and she said, "Oh, Pop, you look so handsome." And I said to my wife, "Give that little girl anything she wants. I don't care when or whatever. That's it. She's got a pass from me for the rest of her life." But I love her so much, and I look at her and I like melt, but then I think to myself, the love I have for her doesn't detract from the love I have for those other 7 grandchildren. It's not like there's X amount of love and you got to cut it up in pieces for all the people you love. There's like an infinite amount of love for each person. And I thought that must be how the higher power sees us when we come into the rooms of AA, right? As a matter of fact, it's even more than that, because when a new person comes into the rooms of AA, it gives everybody the opportunity to share that love. And we all give that new person that kind of love, right? It augments the amount of love in the rooms. I am a retired lawyer. I've been retired 13 years. I like to say that I finally found something I excel at. I'm very good at not working. I did not know that was going to happen, but it has happened. And I'm very fortunate for that. I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York. Neither of my parents were alcoholics. Both of my parents liked a good stiff drink. Never had any problems from drinking. I have one older brother. John died at 59 of cancer. He was a very, very, very heavy drinker. One night we were out at his house. I was in AA, and he said to me, "Do you think I'm an alcoholic?" And I said, "I don't know, John. Why don't you take a test? Why don't you have 2 drinks each day for 30 days? No more, no less. See if you can do that." Well, he read the book, and he took the second test, because the second test says, we think that if you can quit drinking for a year, chances are that you're not one of us. And he'd stopped drinking for a year. And he didn't get restless, irritable, and discontented. He was always a happy-go-lucky person. He remained a happy-go-lucky person. I took him to some AA meetings, and we would sit I had a table with 15 or 20 other guys, and guys would tell their stories, and I would think to myself, man, is that powerful? Wow, I'm really getting banged by the power here tonight. And on the way home, I'd say, "John, what'd you think of that meeting?" And he said, I kind of felt sorry for Louis there. He's got to get divorced, and, felt sorry for him. And Frank there, he's got all those debts he's got to pay. And he never got hit by this thing that I'm hit with right now as I look at these little squares on my screen. Frequently, I think to myself, at the end of any meeting, I needed that, This morning, at the meeting that Stephen mentioned, I thought to myself, I felt great when I sat down to go on this meeting, but at the end of that meeting, I just felt so augmented. I felt much better. I had a better outlook on life, because I'm associating myself with you people and the power that you give away here in AA. When I was growing up, my brother took my father's 16 millimeter film of us growing up, and he put it on CDs, and we were having in the early 90s, we were having a family reunion at my house, and we popped them in the recorder. And here was John and me growing up. He was 6 years older than I. And I'm looking at myself on the screen, and I see this kid who just has to have attention drawn to himself. I'm the kid pushing other kids in the pool and making faces, and people are laughing. My relatives are laughing at my antics, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh man, I'm getting a knot in my stomach. This kid did not feel right, you know." And we had a speaker in Buffalo a few years ago named Burns B. from Louisville, Kentucky, and many of you, I'm sure, have heard Burns speak. And he said, you know, we doctors for years have been looking at alcoholics and trying to figure out what is wrong with them that they want to feel great all the time. They always got to feel good and whatever. And he said, we were looking at the wrong thing. He said, alcoholics feel crappy. They just want to feel normal. And I thought to myself, yeah, that's right. That kid in those films growing up just didn't feel right. And so when I had that first drink of alcohol and I got that warm feeling, I just wanted to feel normal. I didn't want to feel nutty or do the crazy things that I did. My parents would have these cocktail parties, and I would run around asking people for cherries from their Manhattans, right? You know, I love that warm feeling I got from them. I was always a kid who, I was a Dennis the Menace, you know. I always, it's like I woke up in the mornings thinking to myself, what could I get away with today? You know, who am I going to put one over on? What prank can I do today? That seemed to be my MO. When my father bought me a Whammo slingshot, the neighborhood paid the price for that, you know. And when he bought me a chemistry set, oh God, the stuff that I tried to invent and burn up and blow up with it. So, but I always had to, some sort of mischief. And of course, not more often than not, but oftentimes I got caught doing what I shouldn't have been doing. And that experience gave me a lot of preparation for my active alcoholism, because I learned two things. I learned how to lie. I was a very innocent looking kid, big blue eyes, everybody, you know, and I could lie like a trooper. And the second thing I learned how to do by getting in trouble was pray. And I would pray all the time, get me out of this, and I'll never do that. I swear to God, if you only just let me coast on this one, I will do that 500 times, and, you know. And it just seemed to me that my prayers worked. I got out of the trouble I was in many times, but I never lived up to my end of the bargain. Never did. I went to a Jesuit high school here in Buffalo, and then I went to John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio, another Jesuit school. And I can remember the day that my parents dropped me off at college, and I can picture it in my mind's eye right now. I can see that car driving away after they dropped me off, and I thought to myself, free at last. I am free at last. And that thought was all wrapped up in my idea of being able to drink beer as much as I want now. Stay out as long as I want. I'm a man now. I can do whatever the hell I want. Well, I loved college. I had a great time in college. I really did. College was made for me. I did not do very well. I was a philosophy major. Now, how my father let me do that, I have no idea. But I loved philosophy because the teachers pretty much didn't care if you came to class or not. They were up in the clouds somewhere, right? But the classes I did go to were fascinating. It was like just giant bullshit sessions. And excuse me, so I loved that philosophy. So in 1965, when I was about to graduate from college, and I just squeaked through, this war in Southeast Asia was heating up. And I didn't want any part of that at all. Now, let me say that I admire veterans very much. My dad was a Marine in World War I. My brother was an Army veteran. My oldest boy, David junior, was a Navy officer. So I admire people who have the courage to go in, but I did not have the courage or willingness to go into that Vietnam War. So I scurried around looking for getting a deferment. And at that time, if you continued in school, you could get deferred. So I applied to graduate schools and law schools, and I got accepted to Buffalo Law School. My motive for going to law school was just to stay out of that war, period. I did not want to flunk out of law school and get drafted, so I did quite well the first year. Then they changed those requirements to stay out of that war and said, being in school wasn't enough, you could still get drafted. But if you were married in school, you could get deferred. And I had this college sweetheart, and it was about time for that to happen anyway. So we got married, and I skated for another year, and then they said that wasn't enough. I could get drafted, but if you were married and in school and had children, then you could get deferred. And 9 months and 21 days after we were married, our beautiful daughter was delivered to us. So I never had to go over there. You know, AA is just full of Vietnam vets, and just my experience and knowing them and so many of them and whatever is that war really took an awful toll on people. Maybe every war does, but that's the one that I knew most people in. So I graduated from law school, and I got a job with the firm that I wanted to get a job with. And we bought a house, and I had a car, and everything was like perfect. We had 2 more kids, 2 boys. I was making a decent living. I joined this country club that I was raised in, that my dad and mom had belonged to. And I never saw this train coming down the tracks, you know. There was this alcoholism rushing at me, and I just was oblivious to that thing coming toward me. You see, this alcohol now, for me, it took away this nervousness and fears and resentments and whatever, and it just gave me that. I kept chasing that warm feeling, and before I knew it, I was drinking every day. And before I knew it, she was getting mad at me, you know, and the lawyers at work were getting mad at me, and I would make promises that I couldn't keep. I didn't know I couldn't keep them. I figured if 2 weeks go by and I want to drink again, I'll drink again, you know. But in the meantime, the heat got off. That poor woman, and she's my first wife. We got divorced, but that woman right today is in skilled nursing, and she has failed physically and she has failed mentally. And my kids are stuck with a job of attending to her, you know, and I don't feel too guilty about that, really, except that should be me in that bed and not her. She was not a drinker at all. So my married life became more problematic. I've got a fellow in my home group that says the measure of our alcoholism is not how much we drink, but the measure of it is really the problems that we face in life. And my problems were piling up and became extraordinarily difficult to solve. And in February of 1978, on a cold winter morning, I woke up and I had this big fat face, and I had slits for eyes, and I had this infection behind my nose running toward my brain. We went to the local hospital, and they did this operation to relieve the pressure. And I was in the hospital 2 weeks. I got a staph infection and a very, very high fever. They packed me in ice, almost lost me, I guess. But as part of the diagnosis, they did a kind of a new procedure back then in 1978, and that was they took a CAT scan of my brain. And the day I was discharged from the hospital, and again, in my mind's eye, I can see it very clearly, the neurosurgeon, the eye, ear, nose, and throat doctor, and the neurologist stood at the bottom of my bed and said to me, "How much do you drink?" And I said something like, I haven't had a drink in 2 weeks. Yeah, and why do you ask? I said, well, we got these pictures of your brain. You're 34 years old, and you've got the brain of a 54-year-old, and we will give you 2 to 3 years of brain left if you keep drinking, however much you're drinking right now. Of course, if somebody told me I had the brain of a 54-year-old today, I'd say, praise be the Lord. But now that information should have hit a receptor that had the reaction of, holy mackerel, are you kidding me? It didn't. It like went in one ear and out the other. I'm thinking to myself, 2 to 3 years of brain. These guys are conservative, right? They probably mean 4 to 5, and they're trying to scare me. Oh man, I got to remember that when I'm dealing with new guys. That's how new people. I hadn't had a drink when this is right. I hadn't had a drink in 2 weeks, and this is how I'm reacting to that news. But they did what Silkworth did with Bill, and they told Lois about Bill's problem, that he would probably have to be locked up. And these guys told my wife about my problem, and I thought that was pretty dirty pool. So I went home and didn't drink another week, but nobody was patting me on the back and telling me what a good boy I was and how great I did. And so I'm back to work and martinis for lunch again, and I'm off and running again. Now this new law firm I'm with, I'm still at the old law firm. I'm home having a few drinks one afternoon, and a doorbell rings, and I get handed this summons and complaint for a divorce. I take it down to my local watering hole and pass it up and down the bar for all my boys to give me their advice, And, well, Dave, this isn't so bad. I've been done worse than that, blah, blah, blah. So we decide who the meanest lawyer in Buffalo is, that he should be my lawyer, and I go see him. He looks over these papers and he says, this is all about your drinking. I said, yeah, go figure, right? And he says, well, I'll represent you, but you got to promise me that from now until this matter is over with, resolved, you will not drink any alcohol. As God is my witness, you got my promise. Back to the bar, right? Boys, I got him. I got Bill. He's going to represent me. I'm an alcoholic. I don't have a choice, right? I don't have a choice in that. So all the stuff in these papers were about my not being able to see my kids, and I love those kids a lot. So I called Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know who gave me that idea. And this old guy who was in Buffalo at the office at that time says, can you come over now? And I said, well, do you mind can I come over after work? Because I still got this job that's hanging by a thread. He says, yeah, I'll wait around. So I go over there around 5:30, and I sit down at his desk. He says, so you think you're an alcoholic? I said, no. She thinks I'm an alcoholic. I don't know. He said, well, let me ask you this. Did you have anything to drink today? And I said, yeah, I had a couple drinks on the way over here. Oh, man, I just dug a hole for myself there. He didn't make much of that. He told me a little bit about his story. That he says, would you like to go to an AA meeting? I said, all right, I'll go to a meeting. And the next day I went to my first AA meeting, and I fell in love with AA. It was a meeting in downtown Buffalo, and there was a group of people, just like the group of people who are on this meeting tonight, all different ages, some street people, some couple of judges, insurance salesmen, secretaries, and whatever. And I never seen a group conduct themselves like you people did for an hour. Nobody interrupted anybody else. Everybody had a chance to speak.
Hey, that's Alcoholics Anonymous we're talking about.
Yep.
Alcoholics Anonymous.
Yep. I fell in love with AA. And I decided to start going every day. And then one day I decided, well, I'm going to do what these people say they do, and I'm not going to drink for a day. And I couldn't not drink for a day. And so the next day, well, I'll stop. The next day I won't drink. And I drank. And now I'm confused because up until that time in my life, I was certain that I was choosing to pick up and drink every drink I drank until I tried not to drink and I couldn't not drink. But I did get a sober day after a number of weeks and months, and I got a sober week and a sober month, and she had left with those 3 kids and she came back in the house, and I got a job, another job with another law firm, better job. I felt so good physically. I had some hope of getting out of this financial wreckage I was in, and I loved AA. And I guess I thought that if you have people haven't had these miracles happen in your life, keep going to AA. It's unbelievable. But I got real busy, man. I got busy wrapping up the old law firm, the clients, getting the new ones, taking the kids to hockey practice, and ballet, and doing the laundry and making it up to her and whatever. And I don't know. I don't remember picking up the next drink, but if resentment is the number one offender, it was probably that. And then I was off and running again. And all that lying kicked in again. All the hiding of the booze and the pretending I wasn't, and that trying to walk that fine line between slurring your words and stumbling and having enough in you so you don't fly apart and shakes. And, oh dear. My skin, was, I know when you drink enough booze, your skin gets kind of this film on it and it stinks. And then my Irish heritage, my blood vessels are sticking out in my face, and I've got Visine all the time. I'm sticking in my eyes, and sends for my breath. And this law firm was on the 21st floor of this building, and I would hold my breath going up. My face would get big and red, and get off the elevator. Oh, it's not easy. It's not easy being late stage alcoholism and still having a job. So on May 21st, 1979, I come back from having a few drinks at lunch, or however many drinks, and I'm just beat. I'm tired. And I decided, well, I've never done this before, but I'm just going to close my eyes and take a cat nap because I'm just beat. So evidently I locked my door and passed out. And these poor people in this law firm, Dave, open the door, ring, 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 Dave, please pick up, and I'm out. And those lawyers and their secretaries, they thought that I'd taken my life. And so they got the rescue squad up there and the firemen, and this was a beautiful office, and they chopped the door down and come in, are you okay? And I've got my feet up on my desk. I'm looking at these guys with hats on. And what the hell's going on here, right? And the senior partner says to me, Dave, have you been drinking? And everything about me was drunk. I mean, no. I must have taken one too many of these Valium. In those days, you could just check yourself. I would get detoxed frequently. And when I left the detox, they would hand you a packet of Valium and say, don't drink. If you get nervous and feel like drinking, take these Valium. I didn't like Valium. But I carried them around in case anybody accused me of drinking. So we had started this Lawyers Helping Lawyers Committee in Buffalo, New York, and they called this guy who was sober forever, and he came over and he sat down in front of my desk and he says to me, Dave, have you been drinking? And I said, no, I haven't been drinking. And he turns to the senior partner. He says, why don't you do yourselves both a favor and fire this bastard? And that was I thought, the worst day of my life. And it turned out to, of course, be the best day of my life because that's the date of my last drink. So I went back again to detox and then to rehab. And in that rehab, I had this great counselor. And one day he says to me, well, Dave, you've been in AA. You've read all this stuff. Tell me what you think about this first step. Do you think you're powerless over alcohol? I said, I don't even know what does that mean? It's a liquid. It's in a cup. I said, I know this much. When I put it in my system, I got to keep putting more in. And when it's not in my system, I'm obsessed with it. That's all I can think about. He said, well, that'll work for powerlessness. And he says, do you think your life is unmanageable? I So I don't know. I said, I'm sitting in the basement of a rehab attached to a psych center. I'm unemployed and unemployable. I was fired from the last two law firms I was a member of. I have enormous debts. I'm a defendant in 6 or 7 civil actions for collection of money. I'm defendant in an action for divorce. I owe the IRS tens of thousands of dollars. I haven't filed income tax returns in 3 or 4 years. By the way, why would you file an income tax return if you didn't have the money to pay the taxes? I never could figure the answer to that for me. But you're just going to tell them you owe them? That's crazy. Well, I said I've totaled the last 2 cars I've driven. I drank enormous amounts of alcohol after these doctors told me I was getting a wet brain. Said, right now I'm awaiting trial on 2 DWIs. He goes, well, I want to give you some information. I said, what? He says, your life is unmanageable. And so with those 2 realizations, one was that I was powerless over alcohol, and that my life was unmanageable, I got a little bit of relief, figuring out what the hell was wrong with me. And a day or 2 goes by, and he brings me in his office again. He goes, I just want to talk to you about this second step for a second. I said, well, do you know the second step, Dave? I said, yeah. Came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. He says, what do you think about that? And I just bawled. I just cried. Because, I had that God of my youth, that one that I used and abused, that I made all those promises to and never ended my end of the bargain. I couldn't do it. And so I'm sitting on a park bench with the guy who was to become my sponsor. He's my second cousin. He's been in there. He's had a terrible fight with alcoholism. He's been in and out of AA for 25 years, but he's sitting in there with me. And I said, Tom, if I'm going to stay sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, there's this requirement that GOD gets involved, and I cannot go there. I can't. And he said, I want you to read something. He went up to his room and he came back with this little book, and it's a poem called The Hound of Heaven. And you can find that poem in our literature. I think it's in AA Comes of Age. What I got out of that poem was that the higher power is like a hound that's relentlessly chases us down. And we can try to deny it and hide from it and go under rocks and argue with it and whatever, but it doesn't care. Relentlessly, that power will chase after us and chase after us and chase after us. And I thought to myself, well, if that's the case, I don't have to go back to my old God. I don't have to find a new God. If I just put my butt in one of those seats at Alcoholics Anonymous, that thing's going to chase me down. I can do that. So I didn't know it, but I was willing. Willingness is the key, the book says. I was willing to have that happen. I was willing to get chased down by that hound of heaven. And I'll be damned, that happened. And I joined a home group this time. And I got a job in that home group. And we would have step tables. And we'd sit at the table and these old guys would tell us about their experience with these steps. When Tom asked me one night, he said, what about this 3rd step, Dave? Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Again, I don't know what that means. How do you do that? What does that mean? He says, in your case, that means, are you in this thing now? This time? Are you in, or are you going to be around it? You're going to be around it, walking around the rooms, playing the actor. Or are you going to get in AA and continue with the steps? You mean the 4th step? Yeah, I mean the 4th step. Oh, man, I guess, And I'm sober about a year, and Tom and his sponsor, John, and I get in the car, and we go down to speak at a meeting in Gowanda, New York, at a prison down there. And Tom says to me, Dave, we're each going to talk about 15 minutes. And since we all have anniversaries this month in May, they're going to give us these little coins celebrating our anniversaries. I said, really? We didn't do that in my home group. So we go down there, we talk, and we get this. But I find out when my sponsor talks that day that his last admission to our county hospital was his 87th admission for acute and chronic alcoholism. He had had the last rites 6 times. Tom died with 14 years of sobriety, continuous sobriety. He was known as a loser in AA. Now, I didn't know that. I was in rehab with him. People said nobody would go near Tom. He's a loser. Yeah. So I'm telling this story in Florida a couple years ago, and this old timer comes up to me and says, "You could have saved your sponsor's life." So what are you talking about? So you said he was a loser. Yeah, everybody knew Tom was a loser. He said, so nobody was going to ask him to be their sponsor. Oh, no, nobody. He says, well, you gave him the opportunity to practice the 12-step on you. So maybe you gave him that key for his 14 years of sobriety. And I thought, wouldn't that be nice if that was really what happened there? So they give us these little coins. And for those of you who have them, so many of us have them, on the back of that coin it says, to thine own self be true. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, that's not AA. I've read all this AA stuff. That's not in the big book. It's not a slogan. They got a lot of nerve putting that on an AA coin. Who gave them permission to do that? To thine own self be true. And it starts to eat on me because I'm like 15 months sober. And I'm still the same bullshit artist I was when I got in. I know how to talk the talk now. I know the lingo. But you don't know anything about me, really. I have not opened up the door to who Dave was. And I don't know anything about me, and I'm scared to death to take that 4th step. But I see that drink getting closer to me and marching toward me. And I do not want to drink again. Alcohol just knocked the snot out of me. And so with that as my motive, and my only motive, I picked up a pen and pencil and way overdid it, of course. You know, I did the big book and the red book and the 12 and 12 and the 7 deadly sins and the Hazelton guide and all that crap. And I got so much down on paper. And I asked an old classmate of mine who was sober like 3 years to listen to my 5th step. And he did very kindly. And it took all night. And so I was on this path with you people, you know. And I didn't know how to do 6 and 7, but I read this book called The Soul of Sponsorship, and it's correspondence between Wilson and Father Ed Dowling, who was so important to a Jesuit who was so important to Bill Wilson. It's correspondence back and forth. And Wilson would write Dowling and say, I got this problem, I'm struggling with this, I'm depressed, I don't know what to do about it. And Dowling would write him back and consistently say 6 and 7, 6 and 7, 6 and 7, 6 and 7. So I'll finish up by telling you a little bit about the 9th step, which is something I was never going to do, right? I just, my ego is such that I knew I was just going to be impossible to go to these people that I had hurt. So I'm sober like the 2nd year, and my mom invites me over for dinner every Wednesday night before my home group. And I take a deep breath, and one night my mom and dad are there, and I said, you know, I'm in this program now, and I'm supposed to make amends. I just want to say, I want to make it up to you. I know I was a lousy kid. You worried a lot about me, and I gave you a lot of good reasons to worry, and I borrowed a lot of money from you. I'm going to pay that back. And oh, Dave, we're so proud of you. Don't worry about the money. You know, these amends things, it's not so hard, right? This is pretty good, pretty easy. And then they got older, you know, and my dad needed help and my mom needed help with him. And I was there, you know, and I was able to do that. And then she got older and she needed her bills paid and her windows washed and her grass cut. And God forbid she needed to be taken to church every Sunday. You know, we took away her car. She was so mad. She said, if you take away my car, you got to take me to church every Sunday. So there's this terrible winter storm in Buffalo one February morning, Sunday morning. I call her up and I say, Ma, I can't pick you up for church this morning. City's pretty much closed. There's this pause and she says, you said every Sunday. And I go, oh, shit. So I get the shovel out. Of course, I take her to church. But I never did anything for her or for him that I didn't think about amends. And I just would laugh. And I think, my wife I had these 5 teenagers at one point between her kids and my kids. And they were good kids. And I know how much I worried about them. So I know what kind of problems I put my mom and dad through. And so whatever I did for them, I never got even, that's for sure. So I started to amend these. I'll go back just a second. When I was sober in that first year, I had these visions, right? And it was like I would talk to my higher power and he'd say to me, Dave, I want to tell you about your future. Here it goes. You're never going to be offered a job by another law firm because you were too disgraced in downtown Buffalo. You're never going to be invited to any of your kids' weddings because you'll never have a relationship with them. And none of your kids will ever go to college because you'll never have the money to send them. Are you going to stay sober anyway? Yeah, I'm going to stay sober. If that's my future, that's my future. And I would have this recurring sense to this. So I started to amend these lawyers that I'd screwed, and I'd say to them, I know what I did to you, but I don't know what it did to you. What's it going to take to make us square? And they would say whatever it took to make us square. I was able to help some of them sometimes with their kids who had drug or alcohol problems. Other times it was money, and other times it was, glad you're doing well. We don't want to see you around here anymore. Whatever it was. And I was asked to run for Bar Association Board of Directors. And I thought to myself, what an honor that is, because I was kind of a notorious drunk downtown in Buffalo, bouncing from bar to bar. It'd be nice to pay back this profession I've tarnished a little bit. And then I ran and I got elected to Board of Directors. And then a couple of years later, they asked me if I'd run for president of this 38-member bar association, 3,800 members. And I said, sure, I'd love to. And I got elected. So shortly in the first year I'm president of the Bar Association, I get a call from this guy who's the managing partner of the biggest firm in Buffalo. Dave, could we have lunch, please? I have something I want to talk to you about. I have lunch with Bob, and Bob offers me a job at this firm, biggest firm in Buffalo. We think you'd be a good fit, whatever. I knew guys who worked for that firm. They worked awfully hard. I wasn't interested in working that hard. I was making a living, but I was involved with recovery stuff and whatever. But that first year I knew that nobody would ever offer me a job again. And I got offered a job by the biggest firm in Buffalo. Huh? What the hell did I know when I was a year sober? What the hell did I know? So as part of the duties of the president of the Bar Association, I have to go to the Buffalo Law School and sit on the stage with all the other dignitaries in purple and whatever, as the students got their diplomas. And it just so happened that year, my oldest boy, David Jr., was getting his law degree. And they asked me if I wanted to hand him his diploma. So I call his name and I come down, and the provost gives me his diploma and I hand it to him and I give him a big hug. And I'm going back to my seat and their people are cheering, literally, in this auditorium. They are cheering. I'm thinking to myself, how do they know this? How do they know the miracle here? How do they know that? And I sit down and I look, and the next person to get a diploma is a woman in a wheelchair, of course. That's who they're cheering. I thought they were cheering me, right? And I knew that none of my kids would ever go to college, and every kid went to college. Every kid did. Later that summer, 1994, my wife and I always went to New York City to the annual State Bar Association. This particular year, she couldn't go, and I had my youngest boy, Brendan, was going to school at Fordham in the Bronx. And Brendan and I, he was a brilliant kid, but I used to say to him, you got more brains and less common sense than any other kid God ever put together. So we had a tough time with each other. growing up, his mother would always say to me, "You've got to talk to Brendan about what he's doing." And we would, and he would, right, Dad, whatever. At any rate, he was going to school in the Bronx, and I went down for that week in New York, and we spent the week together. I slept a couple nights in his dorm room, and we went to shows and sporting events, and I went out to dinner with his buddies and his girlfriend. At the end of that week, Brendan and I were square, and I think he had amended me too. And 2 weeks after that, he was walking back to school to Fordham University, and he got hit by a car. And Brendan died instantly. And I know that on this meeting tonight, there are people who have lost children. I know that from my experience. But let me tell you how lucky I was to have been square with him, right? And nothing I regretted I'd ever done or said to him or whatever. We get back to Buffalo, and we have this wake, and I won't belabor this, but I got to tell you this, that before the wake is supposed to happen, about a half an hour before, this guy from AA comes in, and he's a big Irish guy. And I know him from the meetings, but I don't know him well, and his name is Pink Cloud Paul, they call him. And Paul comes over to me and takes my hand in his. He's got these striking blue eyes and white hair, and this little smile. He says, "Dave, I don't know if you knew this, but I had a 23-year-old daughter who died of cancer." I said, "Paul, I did not know that. I'm so sorry." He said, "Then 18 months later, my 20-year-old son died of cancer." I said, "You're kidding me." He said, "Yeah." He says, "I just want you to know that you're going to be okay." And from the top of my head to the bottom of my feet, because this guy in Alcoholics Anonymous shared his experience, went out of his way to tell me his experience, I knew I was going to be okay. I knew it. And at that time, when people go through tragedies, other people pray for us. And I had no idea about this power of prayer. I could feel the prayers that people were saying, "I'm praying for you." I could feel it physically, like I was being held up by people's prayers. Prayers work. I know that now from my own experience. So later that year, my oldest boy gets married. And of course, his brother was going to be his best man. And my son asked me to be his best man. And I knew I was going to be invited to any of those weddings. And I was wrong. I'm his best man. The next to get married is my stepdaughter. And she says to me, "Dave, would you walk me down the aisle on one side with my father on the other side?" Then my daughter gets married. Then my stepson gets married. And I'm appropriately involved in all of that. So I'll finish by telling you this. At the end of that poem, Hound to Heaven, when this guy stops running and he sees that this is not a DOG, but a GOD, and God's got his attention, he says to this guy, all that stuff I took out of your life, that family and that job, and responsibilities and your reputation, and love of others, he said, I didn't throw them away when I took them out of your life. I just removed them so you would have to turn to me. And as you have turned to me, and as you have been able to handle them, I've been handing them back to you one by one, by one by one. And that's my story. Thanks, guys.